Good morning, I'm Julie Meyer. Welcome back to EntrepreneurCountry TV. Filmed and broadcast out of Zurich, Switzerland, the center of money, the center of Google in Europe, the center of Disney research in Europe, the center of Protestantism, where no one really knows who runs the country, but by God, it runs really, really well. We're so pleased to have with us this morning my colleague and friend, Philip Greenwood, one of the leading thinkers of our time, who is here sharing with us his thoughts on how technology drives political change, the decentralized technologies, smart contracts, and so much more, the search for new organizing principles in society. He'll be with us shortly, and we look forward to bringing his thoughts to you on EntrepreneurCountry TV. Good morning. Welcome back to EntrepreneurCountry TV. This morning, I'm very pleased to reintroduce you to Philip Greenwood, who's been with us here before on ECTV this morning here in Zurich. Good morning, Philip.
Good morning, Julie.
It's just a pleasure to have you back and to give an update nearly a year later to the audience of Entrepreneur Country, the community of ECTV, about your thinking, what you've been up to, and so forth. And I know that the world of smart contracts and blockchain and decentralized technologies are your focus. In fact, you have been an expert for decades in organizational transformation and a lover of technology and how it drives that. So we're glad to have a discussion this morning with you, sharing with our community some of your thinking. What is really the focus and the priority of your work today? What are you most passionate about, concerned about? What do you spend your time really doing these days?
The main focus of our work at the moment, in fact, is on in the area of blockchain and smart contracts. We think that so far the developments in these areas, we've only seen the tip of the iceberg. And we think that there's been a lot of development, but very little has actually come into production, been adopted by organizations. And the reasons behind that, I think, is that we have so far not, the developers not bitten off enough of the opportunity to make a difference and produce big enough business cases for the use of the technology. Probably because they haven't yet got the tools, the technology is too nascent. So we're working towards building tools to help the delivery of much more transformative business models and transformative applications of the technology.
One of the things that you've shared with me, which really made me think, because I think it's true, but I hadn't heard it said that way, is that when technologies emerge, the politics follow. And I know that as a student and an advisor to organizations that have transformed, you could argue that as well. Tell me a little bit about the way you see technology as an actor throughout history, and how you see that. Why do you focus on the technology, or do you, as opposed to the politics or the organizational behavior? How do you do that? And why are you so good at figuring this stuff out? Is it, you know, where's your secret sauce here? Well,
I see history written by technology more than great men, sometimes women, or states. I think, in fact, when they start teaching history to children, they get it right. They start talking about the Stone Age and the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. And those really are a reference to somebody developed a technology to make a stone create an edge that they can use for cutting. Yes. And so you have the Stone Age, and that can be built into an axe. And so you have behaviors that happen from that axe. Or somebody's developed a technology to refine bronze. Yes. And so now you can make implements with bronze, and that advances the things you can do, but also advances the way humans behave towards each other. Yes. Because some have it, some don't. So the technology triggers the history, or the social history, that we see afterwards. And I think that you can see that writ large all the way up to current day. We see massive transformations from the Industrial Revolution, for example, creating enormous social change, creating war machines that create wars in Europe. And to bring it right up to date, we have the neoliberal economies that we have that have put markets right in the centre, and humans as servants to that. a concept that was developed at a time when computers were barely considered. It was originated between the First and Second World Wars and became adopted in the late 70s and 80s. We didn't have pervasive computing until really the 90s and the noughties. And so what we have now is markets in overdrive. So neoliberalism, in many ways, putting the markets at the centre, has perhaps run its course because we built this technology that exploits them so thoroughly, with algorithmic trading and high-frequency trading going on because of that. So that sets a context socially about perhaps concentration of wealth, perhaps the power of central banks, and layer on top of that another technology, which is the ability to point cast messages to sow the seeds of discontent in a private person, organisation to individual way through platforms like Facebook, social media, that we now can influence people without other eyes being on that influencing, to ensure that it is realistic or that is truthful or pro-social even. So we see this new technology layered on top of another technology, creating the social unrest that we have at the moment and the rise of populism and perhaps the end game around neoliberalism. So those things tie technology developments into the way social change is happening.
So you're not surprised by what's happening in the world today?
I'm as surprised as anybody else and confused. I think at the moment we're going through a process of looking for the new organising principle. We've got new technologies coming online, and particularly the decentralised platforms. These, like any technology, can be used for good or bad, and the question is, how are we going to use them? What utility can we make of them? How do we integrate those with our other technologies, with the other shifts in society? You need to factor that into your thinking. What does that mean to a society to have more older people, more wisdom, if you like, with an undercurrent of technological change? So they've got wisdom in the old way, but can they adopt the new way? And we have life extension technologies or health extension technologies coming online that may mean that people have been born that will live to 200. So we have a huge amount of social change arising from our technological change and technological prowess coming at us, and we're all just trying to make sense of it.
Do you think that there is a tension between the individual and the state, and is it going one way or is it evenly balanced? Some people put it that way, that there is this kind of counterpoint between the state, the individual and the state. Or do you see that dialectic differently?
I don't think it's a new dialectic. I think it's been there throughout the history of states, at least. I think they're the new thing, aren't they? So they're actually a relatively modern creation in their current form. And certainly amongst democracies, there is the issue of people vote for politicians, but are the politicians actually acting in their interests? But at the same time, is the message that certainly in Britain we have this issue with Brexit over the people versus Parliament. That seems to me to be a false message. I think Parliament I'm a big fan of representative democracy rather than direct democracy, largely as a consequence of the Brexit referendum. Right. I think the cost of being informed about the impacts of your vote is so high relative to the effect that your vote has, that what you actually do need to be doing is electing representatives who can spend the time and effort to act on your behalf. Yes. And you give them guidance with your vote and they act on your behalf. And I think that's probably remains the right way to do it. Right,
right. Now, smart contracts is a term, expression that has come into somewhat common usage by a certain group of people, not just the intelligentsia, but maybe not the common man necessarily. But not everybody would really understand the full effect. Have smart contracts gone mainstream? Is this something that is actually happening in society that we can expect to transform our work lives? Or is this still, you know, cutting edge stuff? Help the audience understand what smart contracts really mean.
It's still cutting edge stuff. It still hasn't gone mainstream. And I think when you talk about smart contracts, you need to be thinking in about two different areas of development. There's the smart contracts that work on the permission blockchains, which typically are the corporate owned and controlled ones. And then there are the smart contracts that work on public blockchains, where you can simply declare yourself an actor by choosing an account number. And what we have seen over the last few years, you may have come across this mantra of it's blockchain, not cryptocurrency, which I think is actually throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Yeah. What we've seen is a lot of development in corporates that have been exploiting a very narrow set of new functionality from permission blockchains. But they have spent some time under development, year and a half under development, and they've reached this point of adoption where it's okay, we built it, now adopt it. And they're seeing a lot of resistance because, frankly, it's not enough business case to overcome the status quo. Now, there are some examples, some case studies we could use whereby it does appear to be succeeding, but they are by no means as pervasive as we might have expected a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, when the hype cycle was at its peak. Yeah. That said, in the public area, in the permissionless blockchains, there continues to be a lot of work being done to develop what can be delivered with those solutions. There are new platforms emerging, second generation blockchain platforms that are rising, and those promise to deliver much more power in terms of transaction rates and much more composability in terms of building smart contracts to be able to do things that have utility to people. And I say people there thinking primarily, this is something of a transformative technology because it really is focused at people. It's less inclined towards the corporations. But those technologies do have the power to completely transform value chains, yes, to completely, by extension, transform the organizations that serve the value chains, yes, and by extension, completely transform economies. So I think that is one of the technologies I would pick and say this is a nascent technology that is going to significantly impact the human world. Okay.
Now we are here in Zurich today, and we're happy to have you here on your first trip to Zurich. We hope many more. And one thing I've certainly learned over the past year or so that I've been living here is Zurich is the heart of money. I mean, if this is not one of the most important financial centers, the Zurich population understand money. It's not surprising that we have Crypto Valley down the road, Zug, and we were talking about Ethereum at dinner last night and some of the ties to Switzerland. So, to what extent is this about transforming money? To what extent is it about transforming consumer behavior and the utility factor? Organizational behavior. If a new common sense is emerging, which is happening first? Is it like we're all walking over the bridge together, all of these different components, finance, the average man, the large corporation, the entrepreneur, or do you see some sort of organizing principle in terms of a domino effect or a way that this is being orchestrated, or is that different in different places? How should we measure the change?
Yeah. Well, from the perspective of cryptocurrencies, this is a technology that's now been working for over a decade. Okay. I've personally been tracking it since probably 2012 as a technology.
Are you referring to the origins of Bitcoin there?
I'm referring to the origins of cryptocurrency. So even before Bitcoin, there were other attempts to produce cryptocurrencies. But Bitcoin itself, the white paper came out in 2008 during the banking crisis. So I think to a lot of people's surprise, Bitcoin hasn't gone away. It appears to be emerging to be the dominant cryptocurrency. It remains the dominant cryptocurrency. It seems to have passed the Schelling point, the sort of game theoric point at which it's the natural thing to adopt if you want to use cryptocurrency. But certainly, you know, we're not going to uninvent that technology. It or something like it, I think, is going to persist. And I think that the banking institutions are coming around to that understanding. I think the Facebook attempt to produce its corporate cryptocurrency is interesting. It's by no means the first attempt for corporations to produce their money. Even the British East India Company had its own coin. I like the description of there being government money, there being corporate money, and there being people's money. And I think Bitcoin and those decentralized systems, that's the people's money. I think the Facebook attempt is probably the forerunner in the corporate money one. And of course, we have all of the issues we have with the state banking systems at the moment.
And it seems to me, the loss of the gold standard 50 years ago, but also the inflation. So many people. In fact, I remember at our Follow the Entrepreneur Summit when we were hosting those in Hampshire, Pippa Malmgren said, the West is bust. 6 years ago. And so this inflation-driven quantitative easing and so forth does feel like a complete loss of any kind of sanity. It's not surprising that things that are trustless, fully transparent have emerged, right? I mean, it's a clear result.
It's a clear result. It's a consequence of that.
It's a consequence.
Yeah, but, since the cypherpunks in the 90s, they've been working towards producing Bitcoin or something like it. Okay. So it wasn't it didn't happen in 2008 when Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever he is, she is, they might be, suddenly went out of the air, here's a new type of money. So the need for a more fair kind of money was recognized well before that. And had been, a lot of work had been put into developing it already. So, we have this, like it or not. So we do need to factor it into our thinking. But beyond the cryptocurrencies, we can look at tokenization. I like to think of crypto tokens instead of cryptocurrencies because we can use resilient ledgers, distributed ledger technology, to create tokens that refer to other things in the real world, such as equities and debts and so forth. And we can track those on distributed ledgers too. So we can extend that technology to, there are trillions of dollars of assets that are managed on private ledgers in the world, that are locked up for big chunks of the day because organizations aren't open or closed, that take a long time to transfer between private ledgers. And those are subject to errors. So, one of the opportunities there is to take those trillions of dollars of assets and put them into public ledgers so that the ownership is clear, such that transfers can happen at any given instant at will, not subject to the opening hours or arrangements between organizations that hold them on your behalf.
Interesting. Now, tell us about SCRAD. SCRAD, I love the name because it sounds like a software development kit or something like that. Tell us about this. And is this something that you anticipate is going to kind of emerge slowly and kind of permeate the developer community, or is this something that's going to be a tool of business people instead of organizations? How do you see? Tell the audience what SCRAD is.
Well, the SCRAD is a tool that ipsita, my organization, is prototyping. We're in the process of building it, and effectively it's a development suite for delivering blockchain-oriented or smart contract-oriented solutions. It's the RAD piece. It's a bit radical. It actually stands for Rapid Application Development, but it could also be looked at as saying, well, it's a radical. So the radical approach is to say, okay, we've got blockchains out there of these two natures I described previously, and we've got crypto tokens, and we've got ledgers, and we've got other complementary technologies such as the Internet of Things, such as AI, and these can all be, what we really want to be able to do is compose these together to create solutions. Yes. But at the same time, because these things have a monetary aspect to them, they're open to adversarial attack. Yes. And they're also open, so not just, there's two kinds of adversarial attack. There's technical attack, where you've built errors into your code that allow exploits. And then there's game theory attacks. So they're where people are actually trying to exploit the system in a way that it wasn't intended to be built. So what we're trying to do is build a tool that helps you eliminate those, at the same time as having radical composition of these complementary technologies, delivering code that's robust to both technical exploit and social exploit. And so we're working towards building that tooling, which we think can actually increase the flywheel effect of getting solutions that have real utility to humankind.
Now, people who are listening to this and may be interested in SCRAD will post some information about how they can get in touch with you to find out more about that. And ipsita is, again, the technology startup that you have co-founded and running. Again, share with us, give us an update from when we last heard from you about ipsita and what you're up to there.
Well, I think when we last spoke, our main focus was on a project that we had called NIMIDY. Yes. NIMIDY was a response to the understanding that if you really wanted to deliver smart contracts that you could use in the real world for real business with tangible things, yes, you needed to have some way to do dispute resolution. Yes. Now, there's a big problem with the court system, which is that certainly in the UK, as an example, you can enforce a debt of about £10,000 in magistrate's court, but to enforce a debt anywhere between that and £250,000, which you can do at High Court, economically feasible to do at High Court, you're left with nothing. Yeah. So you need some form of alternative dispute resolution system that you build into your smart contract. But to make that work, you need to be able to exclude the original parties to the contract, because in the space where the public blockchain space, they could potentially declare themselves a number of other identities and influence the dispute resolution process surreptitiously. So to prevent that, you needed hard identity that was expensive to build, such that you couldn't just quickly trigger, I've got a new identity, I'm going to create it, I'm going to influence this process. Right. So we looked at NIMIDY and said, okay, well, that's the driving idea we have for NIMIDY. And then as we looked into the identity use case, we realized that it had a much deeper benefit to mankind, the idea of a self-sovereign identity, and it's very connected with the data that you create as you go through life. Yes. And so we were working towards that, and we still are advocating that. In fact, I'm doing a talk on that in next week to an industry group on smart cards and mobile phones. So we continue to advocate for that, but we found it very hard we needed to raise the funds to be able to build it. Yes. And quite a lot of other organizations had seen the same thing and raised funds through ICOs, which they were willing to stomach, but we weren't willing to stomach on the basis that we weren't too sure about the legality of them at the time. So it struck us that because this was something that was built for social benefit, it would be very hard to raise funds for it, to actually pay for the development of it. So we looked at that and said, okay, let's assume that that technology is coming, because there are these other entities that are moving towards it. We don't think they've got the full picture yet. Some of them have 8/10 of the picture, but the completeness of visions they still need to work on. But given that something like that is emerging, let's look at that and say, within a reasonable future, that's a problem that is being solved, so can support the adoption and use of smart contracts in society. Let's look around the edges of that, be informed by it, and build other tools that can be commercial and can be commercially funded. So that's what drove us towards to SCRAD. In the meantime, we've been bootstrapping the development of SCRAD by services we've been delivering. So we've been building educational products for a UK university in the area of data science and AI. So we've been doing a lot of rolling up our sleeves and figuring out, where is the cutting edge around AI and reinforcement learning and data science, and how do they all fit together? And that's been a fascinating piece of work, and really informed the way we look at the products that that we have, both NIMD and SCRAD, have been thoroughly informed by that ability to dedicate ourselves to actually studying what's going on, and trying to make sense of how that's rolling out.
And that brings us, of course, to our collaboration at Entrepreneur Country. I mean, we do share a lot of similar views around the role of data as a property asset of the individual, but also this desire to mainstream a set of understanding and tools that people have so that they can participate fully in their organizations that are in rapid change and so forth. And we're excited at Entrepreneur Country to have been able to attract you into a collaboration to develop that learning program. Can you share with us, the audience and the community, a bit of how you view that opportunity and why it's important and one that you decided to pursue?
Well, we're delighted to be partnering with Entrepreneur Country Learning. I think the main thing that I experienced in terms of the last year particularly is that it's practically impossible for an executive to both keep up with the innovation advances, technology advances, and deliver transformation, value transformation for the organization at the pace they need to stay relevant and stay in business.
Yes.
So what we need to do is find a way to deliver in a very concentrated fashion insights and understandings and challenges of technology, so an awareness of what's happening, some discussion about how that could influence and impact, frameworks to use to actually be able to think about that. And also a recognition that the educational experiences out there are sort of black or white. You're either sort of doing a master's degree and you're left with sort of study directed and on your own, you're spending 2 years on it, or you've got classroom style learning and it's just take this spoon-fed stuff. Yes. What we're trying to do, I think, is blend those two such that it is both an advanced study in terms of what's happening and its implications at the same time as being concise and concentrated. So it's a balancing of approach in terms of the delivery of I hesitate to call it education because it's really it's insight and it's very practically useful information. So that's the effect of what we're trying to achieve through EC learning. It's a safe place to study. And that's what the safety is that you are not just being led by somebody's point of view, you're being coached along the path and enabled, and shown the tools that you can use and sources you can go to keep learning. And we hope to then create a sort of a flywheel whereby you built foundations and the next piece that comes along you can stack on top of that and you can understand how it all connects together. Because we think there's a real synergy to that. You go in, refresh your knowledge, new platform, new foundations, new things emerge, able to layer them on top, able to understand their impact and what you could do to use
Indeed.
them.
I mean, and that's why we chose a safe place to get smart as our tagline, is because it's almost like a pair of glasses that the more you develop yourself, the more you can see. And that should be it should be done in a way where people feel safe to ask questions and to pursue things that may not always lead to, there's many zigs along the way, zigs and zags, and many attempts to solve problems and to see clearly where around the corners and so forth. Well, we look forward to delivering that Entrepreneur Country Learning program with you, and we have many exciting prospects, and both at the individual level and the corporates who are looking at participating in that. I guess as a final question, I'm really interested in your thinking around this organizing principle. You have said that a couple of times when we've spoken privately, and I know that you're on a quest for helping your colleagues and people in general really understand these mechanisms for collaboration in society. Where do you think that's going? What are the signs of, and how do you think this organizing principle will actually emerge and be covered on the BBC or not? How, you know, what's the manifestation of that going to be? Well,
I mean, first of all, you know, any views that I express that could be interpreted as political are my own, and not our company's and so forth.
Yes.
So we're certainly tap dancing onto politics here. I think what is quite informative is to study the adoption of neoliberalism. So this was an idea that emerged in between the First and Second World War, effectively got shelved during the Second World War, lost to Keynesianism after the Second World War, but became adopted in the social ferment of the 1970s and has become the political orthodoxy of the 80s, 90s, noughties and teens.
Yes.
So there was the Mont Pelerin Society created these ideas. That was a think tank, if you like, of economists and historians here in Switzerland, based here in Switzerland. They set up the Atlas think tank, then set up loads of other think tanks, and they then provided policies and points of view to politicians, and wrote legislature and so forth. And so they've been influencing in the background all of that time. So what happened when we had the social ferment of the 70s was a new organizing principle emerged from the ideas that were lying around. And they understood that they needed to leave these ideas lying around for people to pick up and implement. And since then we've had this rise of market-centric economies and market-centric thinking. I think we're at a similar phase of social unrest. I'm sure cycles through history will go through regular periods of social unrest, of change, where the systems that we implemented perhaps have been overtaken by the technologies, and new technologies are emerging and new ideas are lying around. And I think what we're having now is a process whereby a lot of people are looking and thinking about, well, what is the next way, the next organizing principle of our societies, what takes us to the next level? And some people are trying to find new ideas, and people are then looking at it and saying, well, we've tried that idea, that's communism. We've tried that idea, that's fascism. Those ideas we've already looked at those, and frankly, we don't really want to go to either of those, but we know we need to change something, but we don't quite know yet how to change it. And we don't know how long this process is going to take, but it's a decadal thing for sure. Yes. But it'll be a blend. It'll be a blend of some ideas that are enabled by our new technologies.
Yes. And
I'm as confused as anybody else at this point in time. Anybody who thinks they know the answer is speaking out in public, but I don't know the answer, but I do somehow feel that wave is crashing on the shore fairly soon. I don't relish the prospect, because in the meantime there's potential for very serious social unrest. I hope we don't have to go there for it. Yeah. But that does seem to be what's happening in our time. And it's intriguing to me that people of my generation have been immersed in the neoliberal idea, because our whole sort of politically conscious lives, that we've had this since Thatcher and Reagan in the late 90s and 80s started putting in these doctrines into action. And it's been my generation's orthodoxy. It's been the right thinking idea of my generation. And we're really confronted by what's happening now and saying, well, we spent our lives advocating these things. Is that right? Yeah. Maybe that's not as right as I thought it was.
Or maybe the world's changing.
I need to change my mind, but what do I change my mind to?
Yeah.
That's challenging.
Absolutely. Well, listen, thank you so much for helping us explore those waves crashing on the shore, as you put it. Very, very pleased to be working with you on EntrepreneurCountry Learning, EC Learning, and to be watching the progress of SCRAD and ipsita. And we're going to share with our community more of that over time. I hope that you'll be speaking at Follow the Entrepreneur this year for our 10th year anniversary. In Greece in late September. As always, your thinking helps to really shine a light on some of the key ideas that the community should be reflecting on, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us here in Zurich this morning. Thank you so much, Philip. That brings us to the end of another EntrepreneurCountry TV. We look forward for you sharing this with your friends, subscribing to EntrepreneurCountry TV, and tuning in next week. Thank you very much.